The night had fallen heavy over Shanghai, its streets shimmering with rain and neon reflections. Limousines and black SUVs lined the driveway of the Golden Orchid Hotel, where one of the world's richest investors, Richard Hale, was wrapping up a private meeting with Chinese business partners. Richard was the kind of man who drew attention without meaning to. Tall, confident, the kind of quiet authority that came from years of winning. To everyone else, he looked untouchable. But that night, as he stepped out of the marble lobby toward his waiting car, a quiet voice cut through the rain. "Sir, please wait," a woman said, breathless. He turned. It was May, one of the hotel's cleaning staff, thin, small-framed, in her early 30s. Her uniform was still damp from mopping the floor. Her eyes darted nervously toward the two Chinese bodyguards standing by Richard's SUV. Richard frowned. "Yes, is something wrong?" May hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. She spoke in a whisper. "Please don't get in that car." For a moment, all Richard could do was stare. "Excuse me?" Her voice lowered even more. They said, "They're going to make it look like an accident." The bodyguards stiffened. One of them barked something in Mandarin, his tone sharp. May immediately backed up, fear flickering across her face. Richard looked at the guards. "What did he just say?" The younger guard smiled tightly. "She's confused, sir. Don't listen."
Oh.
But May shook her head desperately. "They're not taking you to the airport. They're taking you to the bridge." Richard's pulse quickened. There was something about her eyes, terrified but sincere, that made him pause. He'd done business long enough to recognize when someone was lying. She wasn't. The older guard stepped closer. "Sir, we should go. You're running late." Richard didn't move. The rain hammered down harder now, and the air seemed to grow heavier. May whispered again, just loud enough for him to hear. "You helped them make a deal they didn't want. They think you know too much." Richard froze. The billion-dollar merger. The one his firm had been negotiating for months. Suddenly, the pieces fit together, the strange messages, the silence from his partner, the last-minute change in travel plans. He looked straight at May. "Come with me." Her eyes widened. "What?" "Come with me now," he said firmly. "If what you're saying is true, you're not safe either." Before she could answer, the younger guard reached for his gun. Richard reacted on instinct, grabbing May's hand and pulling her behind him as he slammed the car door into the man's wrist. The gun clattered onto the wet pavement. The other guard lunged forward, but Richard shoved him back, shouting, "Run!" They bolted down the side alley behind the hotel, rain splashing against their faces, tires screeching behind them. Richard's heart pounded, but adrenaline drove him forward. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stop. They turned a corner and ducked under an overhang behind a noodle shop. Both of them were breathing hard, soaked to the bone. Richard looked at May. "You just saved my life." She shook her head. "No, not yet. They will keep looking." Her voice was steady now, but her eyes betrayed the fear she tried to hide. He glanced toward the street where shadows moved through the fog. "Then we find somewhere safe." May hesitated. "I know a place, but you have to trust me." Richard gave a small, humorless laugh. "At this point, you're the only one I do." As they disappeared into the labyrinth of Shanghai's backstreets, now the sound of approaching sirens faded into the distance. The billionaire and the cleaner, two people from completely different worlds, were suddenly bound by something neither of them expected: survival. But what Richard didn't know was that May had a secret of her own, one that would turn everything he thought he knew about loyalty, money, and fate upside down. They moved through the narrow, rain-slick alleys until May stopped in front of an old tea house tucked behind a row of shuttered shops. Its signboard was faded, its red lanterns barely glowing. She knocked twice, paused, then once more. The door opened just enough for a wrinkled face to appear. "Uncle Lin," May whispered. "Me." The old man's eyes widened when he saw Richard standing behind her, soaked and breathing hard. "You bring trouble, child," he muttered in Mandarin. "I had no choice," May replied quietly. He sighed, opened the door wider, and motioned them in. Inside, the tea house was dim and filled with the smell of jasmine and old wood. A single bulb flickered above the counter. Richard glanced around, still tense, trying to make sense of what was happening. Uncle Lin poured tea for all three of them. "They're looking for you already," he told May. "The men who work for Zhang Wei." At that name, Richard froze. Zhang Wei, the very man he just signed the billion-dollar merger with that evening. He turned to May. "What do you know about him?" May exchanged a glance with her uncle, then looked back at Richard. "Zhang controls more than half of the logistics networks in the city. The deal you made, it wasn't just business. It gave him control of routes used for smuggling." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "That can't be true. My company vetted every part of that deal." May shook her head. "They used your name to make it look legitimate. Once it was signed, they didn't need you anymore." The realization hit like a punch. The missing documents, encrypted files, the canceled calls from his legal team. Someone inside his own circle had betrayed him. Uncle Lin leaned closer. "Can't go to the police. Zhang has men there too. You'll need proof and the right people to expose it." Richard ran a hand through his wet hair. "Then we find that proof, whatever it takes." May hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "I already did." He looked at her in disbelief. "You have evidence?" She nodded. "I cleaned Zhang's office. One night I heard him talking about you, how they would make it look like a car crash after the documents were signed. I copied the files before they could erase them." Richard exhaled, half in relief, half in awe. "You risked your life for that?" May's eyes softened. "My brother worked for him once. They killed him when he found out too much. I couldn't let him do the same to anyone else." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain pattered softly against the windows, and the world outside seemed to blur. Then, suddenly, headlights swept across the tea house wall. The sound of engines followed. May's eyes widened. "They found us." Uncle Lin moved quickly, ushering them toward the back door. "Go." Through the kitchen. Richard grabbed May's hand as they slipped through the narrow hallway. Bullets shattered the front windows, sending shards of glass flying. The old man shouted something in Mandarin, then the back door burst open, and they were out into the storm again. They ran through puddles and garbage-strewn alleys until they reached a bridge overlooking the Huangpu River. The city lights shimmered in the water below. Richard leaned against the railing, breathing hard, trying to think. "We can't keep running," he said. "We need to go public with this." May shook her head. "If we go to the wrong person, they'll kill us before we can speak. Then who can we trust?" She hesitated. "There's someone, an investigative journalist named Li Chen. My brother helped her once before he died. She knows how to get information out safely." Richard nodded. "Then we find her." But before they could move, a black SUV screeched to a stop at the other end of the bridge. The same guards from the hotel stepped out, guns drawn, eyes scanning through the rain. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're not giving up." May clutched the flash drive tightly in her fist. "Then neither can we." As they turned and ran into the night, the rain poured harder, washing over the city like a storm that had no end. The truth they carried could destroy one of China's most powerful men, but only if they lived long enough to reveal it. They didn't stop running until dawn began to cut through the night. The city was waking up, neon fading into the pale gray of morning, streets buzzing with delivery bikes and honking buses. May and Richard ducked into a narrow alley behind a noodle shop, drenched and exhausted. Richard leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "We can't keep this up," he said. "I'll find us before sunset." May wiped rain from her face. "We're close to the old print district. Li Chen's office isn't far. If we reach her, she can help us send the files overseas before Zhang's men can stop it." Richard nodded, but his mind was racing. "What if she's compromised too?" "She isn't," May said firmly. "Li doesn't work for anyone. That's why Zhang wants her gone." Moments later, they slipped into the morning crowd, pretending to be just another pair of tired commuters. The rain had slowed, but tension still hung thick in the air. Richard noticed security patrols on every street corner, unmarked black vans parked by intersections. Zhang's influence ran deeper than he'd imagined. When they finally reached Li Chen's office, it was hidden inside an abandoned newspaper building. The paint was peeling, the lobby empty. But up on the third floor, a faint light glowed under a metal door. May knocked softly 3 times, then 2. The door creaked open. A woman in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and calm, stared at them. May, you shouldn't be here, Li said in Mandarin. It's not safe. I know, May replied. But it's worse for him. Li's gaze shifted to Richard. You're Richard Hale, the American businessman everyone's talking about. Richard gave a tired nod. Apparently also the man Zhang wants dead. Li motioned them inside. Her office was cluttered with files, maps, and stacks of old newspapers. A corkboard covered one wall, dotted with photos of politicians, businessmen, and Zhang Wei himself circled in red. I've been trying to expose him for years, Li said, setting down her tea mug. But every source I get disappears. Not this time, May said, handing her the flash drive. Everything's in their offshore accounts, smuggling routes, encrypted messages between Zhang and government officials. Li's eyes widened. If this is real, it's enough to burn half his empire. She plugged in the drive and began decrypting the files. Lines of code and documents filled her screens. It's all here, she murmured. But we LAL need to transmit it outside the country before Zhang's firewalls close in. Suddenly, her computer beeped, a warning flashing red. They're tracing the signal, Li said, her voice steady but tense. How? Richard demanded. Zhang's cyber team. The moment this drive went online, they started tracking its signature. May's heart pounded. We have to go. Li pulled out a small portable drive, transferring the data quickly. There's a satellite uplink tower a few blocks away. If we can reach it, I can upload the files directly to the global press network. They rushed out of the office, weaving through the narrow streets of the district. The sky had turned a smoky gray, and in the distance, Richard could hear sirens, fast approaching. Halfway there, a black car cut them off. Men in suits jumped out, shouting orders in Mandarin. Li shoved the portable drive into May's hand. Take it and run. What about you? Richard yelled. I'll stall them, she snapped. Go. Without another word, May grabbed Richard's hand and darted through a maze of market stalls. Vendors shouted as they crashed through crates of fruit and hanging lanterns. The sound of boots followed close behind. They turned a corner and found themselves facing a dead end. Rainwater dripped from the roof as they looked around desperately. Up there, Richard pointed to a fire escape. May climbed quickly, her hands trembling, clutching the drive like her life depended on it. When they reached the rooftop, the tower loomed a few blocks away, its blinking red light cutting through the haze. Richard took a deep breath. Once we get that signal out, Zhang's finished. But before May could answer, a gunshot echoed through the alley below. Li Chun's voice cried out, then silence. What? May froze, tears forming in her eyes. And she didn't make it. Richard put a hand on her shoulder. Then we finish what she started. They sprinted across the rooftops as more guards appeared below, shouting orders. Rain began to pour again, as if the city itself was trying to wash away the corruption beneath its surface. May reached the tower first, connecting the drive to the uplink port. The connection flickered, unstable. Richard helped steady the cable while she typed rapidly, sending the encrypted files to international servers. A bullet grazed the metal near them. Another hit the ground inches away. Hurry, Richard shouted. It's almost done, May cried. Just a few more seconds. The progress bar climbed to 80%, 90%, 100%. The files were sent. Then, a final gunshot cracked through the air. May gasped, her body jerking as the drive slipped from her hand. Richard caught her before she fell. No, stay with me, said his voice breaking. May smiled weakly, blood on her lips. It's okay. They can't hide anymore. Sirens wailed in the distance. Helicopters buzzed overhead. News alerts were already spreading. Zhang Wei's empire, exposed across the world. Richard held her as the rain poured down, knowing the truth had finally won, but at a cost that would haunt him forever. He whispered, You saved us all, May. Her eyes fluttered once more. Just promise me you'll tell my brother. Richard nodded, tears mixing with the rain. I will. And as the first light of dawn broke over Shanghai, the story of a humble maid who defied a billionaire spread across the globe, a reminder that courage, docility, need power.